Yeah. Okay. Well, this was going to be just, we haven't got any plans for today. So it's going to be driven by you, but can we just look at our trek this morning? Yeah. For those of you who went on the trek this morning. What did you learn about love on the trek? Any ideas?
Well, if we
So we come down there and then we pass back, and up here if you just pass back to
Billy.
Billy, he's up there.
To look out for others and not just yourself?
Yes, so no, not much care for others in the entire group actually. So that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Like, we can talk about love for years, but then you put yourself in a practical situation and instantly all of your addictions kick in. And before you know it, you're not even thinking about anybody else, just thinking about yourself. Some of you are a bit nervous, and the more nervous you become, the more you don't think about others, and so forth. And then, you know, it's so you can see straight away that the advantage of having a practical situation is that straight away you're going to learn some lessons of love that you thought you already knew, but you don't. Yep. If it's not natural to consider others, then you're already in a unloving space. If it's not natural to consider others. If a person who's in a loving space always considers others in all of their decisions, every single decision, what you spend your money on, what you spend your time on, and you consider others in every one of those decisions, because every decision you make affects somebody else. Yep. So that's one fundamental way. Now, today there was a number of ways not considering others. There was a lack of modesty on the part of some who weren't aware of their own limitations, and so they put themselves in a position where, you know, the walk was above their ability, and then of course that's not considering others, because you just want to be there, you're thinking, but actually you've got to consider others. If it's a group, can you keep up with them? And then there's the opposite to that. The ones of you who went ahead not considering others, we did actually ask the leader to at every junction to stop and wait, but that wasn't considered. And so there's the other side of not considering others. When you have an ability that others don't have, then you want to just engage your own abilities and then forget about how others are or feel about that. Does that make sense? So there's a number of different ways we don't consider others, not just in regard to pushing ahead, but it's also in regard to, are we capable of even keeping up? And modesty, which is an aspect of love, requires that you know your own limitations. And then on the other side, care of others requires that you understand the limitations of others. Make sense? Yeah. So thanks, Sam. We were up the back on this side, and Billy over this side.
Yeah, I find I was breaking other people's free will. I didn't realise I was doing it. I was trying to talk to people and
whether they wanted you to talk or not. What we noticed, there's a lot of things that kicked in with regard to your addictions with regard to talking. Mm-hmm. Very few of you are capable of being silent, like for any short period of time even, right? When you're with somebody, you feel you need to engage them. And as a result, there was also very little consideration of the environment. A group like that going through an environment is basically making an impact on all the animals, the birds and everything else. So I bet hardly any of you saw anything. Is that how it is? Other than trees and plants.
But sometimes I felt like nobody saw the trees or plants. There was a lot of talk together, and there was these magnificent trees, even on the short part that Jesus and I got to go on, but nobody was really present with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So also lack of love of the environment. Very little consideration of the environment. Very little consideration of the noise you're making in the environment. You know what I mean? And these kind of things are also aspects of love, where you consider the environment, consider the impact you're having on it while you're going through, but also enjoy the environment. And to do that, a lot of times you have to be silent so you can hear the environment. Does that make sense? But each of you got involved in your own addictions with whoever you were walking with, and that caused you to skip over all of those considerations. Yeah.
And also, one point I nearly hollered less talk, more walk, because also the more you got engrossed with each other, the slower it seemed
you
to
got.
go.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not about, breaking a land speed record, but equally there's a pace that you need to sort of keep at, and you can still enjoy the nature as you do that. But when everyone gets in their addictions, they have this tendency to sort of slow down or speed up, and none of those things are really considering not only the other people but the environment as well. Yeah.
So we could have just walked up and down some stairs probably, and it would have had the same exercise
Impact, yes.
exercise effect and the same impact. And that is a shame, because if you haven't got any connection with the environment, then how are you ever going to recover it? How are you ever going to understand it and recover it? We're in desperate need on this planet of having a lot more respect for the environment. But what we find when we go on these walks is almost everybody has no respect for it, no respect for the environment, and also no desire to even connect to it in any way. So that's really interesting. Yeah? We're on this side, yeah? Tim? Yeah.
Once I got the message from the back to speed up, then I just went, and that was kind of it.
Yeah, remember there were
just
two messages from the back. One was to speed up a bit, because obviously everything was very slow at the beginning.
Yep.
And everyone was in their addictions at the beginning too, and speeding up a bit sometimes helps that. But then, on the other hand, there was the other instruction, which was to wait at every crossroad so we know where we're going. And that got ignored. So frequently what happens when and you'll find this in Australia if any of you come to visit and are involved in God's way in any way, and also if we ever set up a God's way in Europe or somewhere else, you'll find there's all these ways in which you thought you were loving, and very rapidly, like within usually the first day, usually the first 10 minutes, a lot of things are exposed where you're not loving. Does that make sense? Where you just think, each of you must come to realise that you're all thinking what you think is normal, but that's not what the next door person next to you think is normal. And many of us think, oh, I'm doing the normal thing, but what we're saying to you, the normal thing is not the loving thing anyway, and the loving thing would consider all of these aspects. That makes sense? So that's one reason why we do this, is to get a bit of an idea of a group and how loving it is, in terms of a really sincerely loving or not. Does that make sense? So you all failed.
You all had a learning experience.
You all had a
hopefully.
learning experience, hopefully. But you can see the more loving you become, those kind of things probably wouldn't have occurred, right? Yeah. All of the different parts of it. And also, one of the beautiful things about walking in nature is you're firstly getting some exercise. So you need to get along at enough of a pace where you do get exercise. And then secondly, you also are hopefully connecting to the nature around you. And to do that, like quite often Mary and I will walk for a whole couple of hours and not even talk to each other. We're just like feeling what's going on around us, noticing different things. And if you looked at the trees that we walked through today, very few of them were older than 300 years. There was one we saw right near the end of our walk, which was up by the town itself, which probably would have been around 600 to 800 years old. It was quite a large tree, but it was dying.
We didn't get to the woods. Did you? Were there bigger trees in the woods?
In the woods, in the no, a lot of it regrowth. So it's all been cleared many times before, grown again, and a lot of people think, well, that was a nice sort of wooded walk, but actually it's devoid of a lot of life. And the reason why is because most of the walk was actually regrowth. And the trouble with regrowth is that when you clear out all of the nature out of a landscape, all of the birds, animals, creatures all die. There's nowhere for them to live, and they all eventually die. There's no food, so they all die off of that in that area. And then when the regrowth comes, it takes many years, oftentimes hundreds of years, for the animals and the birds and the creatures to come back. So a situation where you've got some wooded areas, even though it looks maybe more like it's been cared for and more in nature, it's actually far removed from what God intended it to be, because of the problems we engage with regard to the way we handle the environment. The way humans control the environment is very, very impactful on the environment in a destructive manner. Yeah. So you get to see all that too, right, when you're walking around. So I'm not just looking at what's there, I'm also looking at what could be there. Yeah.
And your spirit friends like inspiring you when you're connected, not just about your own personal progression, but also about what used to be there and what's the potential that still exists that could be restored.
Yeah. When a person loves, it touches every area of their life, not just their relationships, but every area of their life. So it includes your love of self, your love of others. So you could say that's your relationships, but it also includes your love of of creatures, animals, birds, all of the insect life, the natural life, you could say, all of the tree, even the soil, includes all of that as well when you love. So when you're loving towards everything, you find that you get to see how everything actually is a lot more and how destroyed it's been because of a lack of love as well. And to do that, you need contemplation time. To do that, you need silence. Yeah. Anything else you learned?
If we go to
Charlotte.
So already yesterday I was thinking about I would like to spend time with you guys.
Yeah.
And so I had some feelings of jealousy or competition come up.
When we go on a walk with a group of people, we're very mindful of who's with us and we need to look after them given the fact that we organise the event. So, that's our primary focus. Our primary focus when we walk with a group is looking after the people who need looking after the most. So that means, for the most part, we're not going to get to talk to you. Right? And for the most part, we don't want to anyway. We're in nature. we want to enjoy it, you know what I mean? When we walk by ourselves, Mary and I, we walk, anywhere from 6 to 10 Ks every day. And all the time we're focused on firstly feeling the environment when we're walking. Sometimes we'll talk, but not a lot, not all the time. A lot of times we're silent. Yeah. And it's interesting too, isn't it, the demand you place on us, even just thinking that that's the purpose of the walk. You follow? It's not the purpose of the walk. The purpose of the walk was really for us to see where you're at with regard to love. Yeah. And frequently, you're the most unloving with us, which is interesting. You're the most unloving with the very people who are trying to teach you how to love. Right? Now, there are certain things in the spirit world, if that happened, that eventually the spirits would just walk away, If they find you being unloving with them while they're trying to teach you about love, then one of the things they need to teach you is you're not respecting the will of another, or you're not respecting the love of the person who's teaching you. And one of the things that happens there is they just walk away from you. They won't be able to help you. So this is a very important thing. We can't help you if all you do is badger us, push us or demand things from us. The thing we must do under those circumstances is walk away. Just for the sake of love of self. Make sense? Yep.
And also, we're quite attracted to people who love others. A lot of you don't notice that, but we often choose to spend a little more time with people who are engaged with loving others. So that was, today it was just that we were walking at the back, but in general, it's quite an attractive quality when you love others. Something to reflect upon as well.
Yeah. Anything else? Sure.
For me, so I was in the middle when at the area where we lost the group.
Yeah,
and
you were in the middle group. Yep.
I felt that happening,
Yep.
and so rather than taking the logical decision, which was to go to the leader and ask him to stop, I went to Mary to ask for if I should do that.
Yes.
And then we lost the group. So
Yeah. So
it was not logical for my part.
Yeah.
that's right.
No.
Checking with, quite often there's a tendency to treat Mary and I like your daddy and mummy. And like, check with daddy and mummy first to see whether that's okay, that kind of thing. But see, if love's in your heart, love would already know what to do, wouldn't it? It would already know the best course of action.
And in that case, you already did know the thing to do, didn't you?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
just
I was just
holding back.
didn't want to take responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah, partly that, but also partly afraid to get in trouble,
Yeah.
which
yeah.
is a big thing for you, isn't it, Yura?
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of times we're afraid to get in trouble from mummy and daddy, while at the same time trying to please mummy and daddy, while at the same time having demands on mummy and daddy, while at the same time, you know what I mean, trying to avoid the environment. Now, of course, the enjoyment of the environment obviously now becomes quite low down the list, doesn't it, with all of that? Yeah. When you have love in your heart, you know what to do. You don't have to ask somebody else what to do. Yep. And it's a good thing to experiment with for yourself in your own lives. Like rather than asking somebody else, is this loving or not? Just ask yourself all the time, is this loving or not? What do I feel? What do I feel? Is what I'm doing loving or not?
Mm.
Does that make sense?
It's very important in your relationship with God and your growing your own principled self. Remember the last trip we were here, we talked a lot about living according to principle. If you aren't growing it like a muscle, if you like, checking in all of the time with somebody else actually weakens that muscle. Whereas if you are asking God, checking in with yourself and taking action, you're either going to hit the mark or miss the mark, but
you'll be able to at least measure the action and its
Yes.
consequence. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Val?
I made the assumption that, which might have been unloving, that anybody lagging behind would call out and sort of say, you know, wait up,
Yep.
which obviously it didn't because we broke up. But then I noticed towards the end of the walk, that was happening. People were shouting out, wait up, and then people, wait up, and then we'd get to the front and then we'd wait up.
Yeah.
And that was an improvement to it. But
But that's sort of saying, you see, what I feel is a lot of people are shy, a lot of people are, you know, timid, a lot of people have their own emotional injuries that they obviously not very aware of. So asking a person to speak up, quite frequently you guys don't speak up to others when you know that they might put you down or you're worried they might. And so, you know, there's a whole dynamic going on frequently in a group where there are some people who are usually more, you could say, more outspoken, and then there's others who are more timid. And each of those things are injuries. Obviously, they're not necessarily loving things, but the trouble is that when we're in a situation, whatever standard we have is what we expect them to do. Does that make sense?
that's what I did.
Yeah, and so this is where we have high assumptions and demands, is that we expect other people to do what we would normally do. So a person who's timid would normally expect everyone to be timid.
So with like free will and responsibility to do those things or speak up, it's like, how do I discern what's loving or what's unloving? Because if I infringe on people and start sort of mummying them or saying, oh, you know, I don't know, walk up
Go
and down.
back to Friday of our discussion, Val.
Sorry?
What did I say Friday morning in our discussion?
Oh, well, not necessarily me, but I mean...
I'm answering your question, though.
Okay.
What did I say Friday morning?
Was this about not making it personal?
No, I
Oh,
didn't
right,
say that
okay.
Friday morning.
No, what did you say?
I
Friday
said,
morning?
how do you learn what's loving?
What you feel?
No, I didn't say that. Can anyone help? Margaret? Ask God. Ask God.
Okay.
And how do you know what's loving? By having enough of God's love in your heart to know what's loving.
and not talking. I suppose that would help, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, most of you still don't realise that asking God for love is a practical thing. You're thinking along the lines, well, I've got to work out for myself what's loving or not. No, well, what did I say Friday morning? I said that that's really not going to be possible because most of you have distortions about what's loving or not. So what you think is loving is for somebody to speak up. But what about a person speaking up in an unloving environment? And today's environment was quite unloving. So should they then speak up? Like, you notice I didn't yell out to you at the end of Slow Down.
No.
Why is that?
You were waiting for us to notice. And
To work out what's loving, yeah.
Okay.
So while if I was walking with somebody, I would never, in fact, yell out to them to slow down. Ever. Why? Because it's their free will. If they want to go fast, they can go fast. And I'm happy to go the speed I'm happy to go at, and I don't need you to nurse me on my speed. I'm going to know my limits. I'm going to be modest. I'm going to know my limits. Obviously my limits now when I'm 62 is different than my limits when I was 20. And, when I was 20, I could surf all day in the freezing cold water and not worry about it. When I'm 62, surfing all day in the freezing cold water, I feel like, well, I'd like warm water, thank you. You know what I mean? Like, there's limits to... there's also, you learn over time. Like back then I was a nut, freezing. I was surfing in 6-degree water, for a whole day and coming out, and I couldn't feel most of my body by the end of it. And I'm going, well, that's a bit silly. You don't know whether any of it's been damaged. And one time I was bitten by a shark and I didn't even know. It's just a little shark, but I was bleeding everywhere, and I didn't know. I was so cold, right? I didn't know. And it was only when I get out the water that I saw blood everywhere and everything. Yeah. So, you don't know, right? So, for me, like, the more loving I am with myself and the more loving I am with others, I don't need you to come to do what I'm doing, but I also don't need to do what you're doing.
And also, the way I feel about it is my responsibility is to love myself and love others. So rather than point the finger at someone else and say, well, you're not doing the loving thing, so I'm not going to do the loving thing, then we're in big trouble, aren't we? That we're in the state that the whole world's in right now.
Yeah.
If I'm responsible for loving others and I notice that they're not loving themselves, then I point that out.
Yeah.
But
So I did point out to both Margarets we were walking with that they weren't modest. And we had that conversation, didn't we? Yeah. So, and that was good to have a conversation like that because, then you realise, I'm getting on now in age, and also Tall Margaret has had a bad accident when she was very young and, had her ankle fused and all sorts of other things. You've got to understand your own limitations in that regard. And if you're not that healthy, you've got to understand your limitations in that regard too. That's a part of love of self, but it's also a part of love of others. Because when you impose your limitations on others, now you're not allowing them to have their free will either, right? They're not allowed to do what they want to do. So for us to walk like today, if some of you wanted to walk ahead and do it fast, to us that's fine, but not if you're the leader who has been asked to direct everyone. Does that make sense? If you're the leader who's been asked to direct everyone, that's no longer fine because now you've lost everyone and nobody else thought to bring a map, or hardly anybody thought to bring a map or anything with them, so they didn't know what to do. And it's only my good sense of direction that pointed people in the right direction generally. So this is why Mary and I usually follow the group right at the end, because we can sort of sort out all those kind of things that happen, because we, to a degree, expect it to be unloving, and then we can help people see where it is. Make sense? Yeah. If we go Chris and then Aaron and then down the front.
So can you explain to me obviously I was behaving unlovingly because you prodded me to speed up.
Yep.
I wasn't aware that I was being unloving.
Well,
when
you were in your
You're
addiction with
deep in
talking.
addiction.
Yes.
In talking.
Yes.
You love talking, Chris. And you're quite often in addiction with it.
Yeah.
And so you're not aware of what you're doing in that place. The problem with addictions is that you become unaware of yourself. Your addiction is now dominating your behaviour rather than your will dominating your behaviour. You understand that when you're in your addiction, you're really no longer really understanding the exercise of your will, because your will is being used unlovingly in the addiction. Now, I've been really polite with you guys in calling them addictions, right? They're evil loves. They're evil loves. Your addictions are evil loves. So many of you need to start to see, wow, my addictions, many of you have thought of them as, oh yeah, that's just me, or oh yeah, that's not in that important, you know. Oh yeah, I know I make a mistake here and there with my addictions, but you know, everybody does that kind of thinking. Can you see that if you remember in the group this weekend, we just called them evil loves, and the reason why I call them that is because that reminds you that every addiction is evil. It has an evil undertone in it. It has a way, anything out of harmony with love, God's love I'm talking about now, is evil in its nature to a large degree. And we've got to get to the stage where we see it as such. You're very uninclined to change unless you see it as wrong.
Yeah.
You see, so for most of us with our addictions, we sort of see them as rights, our right, it's right for us to do it. And we also see it as our right to do it as well, rather than seeing even that attitude in itself is evil, right? So frequently we're not conscious of others. So if Mary and I were walking together by ourselves, but just us, I vary my pace to suit Mary's pace.
All right to you.
And Mary
depending
does
on
the same.
One of us sometimes hasn't had much sleep, or we're tired, or has sore hammies from doing
I've just done
something else.
a leg workout the day before or something, and so I'm a bit slow that day, the next day, or sometimes just like Mary said, had not much sleep or something like that. There's been times when we've been here where we've had 3 hours sleep in a night. So the next day when we do our 10K walk, we're not like trying to push each other along. And if you feel each other, you can sort of feel, oh, there's the pace, and off you go and hit it.
And for yourself, Chris, because we were a ways behind you, it was very obvious that you weren't sensitive to anyone else on the walk. Just you were speaking with somebody.
And also you wanted to talk to us specifically. You had the same thing Charlotte mentioned. You wanted to talk to us specifically, and because we were at the end, you wanted to hold back more and more and more. But you were in front of us, and we wanted to be behind you because obviously we want to be the last people there just to make sure everything's fine. And as a result, you weren't aware, but you're stepping further and further and further and further back from the group when you could have just been catching up with the group, and we could have all followed you further. Of course, with the two Margs, that might not have been possible, but you would have been okay with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Aaron?
I had the feeling that I just really don't want to take responsibility for anyone else.
Yeah.
I really don't want to care for anyone else.
Yeah.
And
because it interrupts your life, doesn't it? Like even just on a walk, if I'm walking along at my own pace and whatever, there's me alone and I'm walking along my own pace. But as soon as I add 2 people with me, now if I love, I will take into consideration those 2 people. Now I'm interrupting my life to love them, right? Yeah. The average person doesn't want to do that. This is how we've become so self-absorbed we don't even think of it. Make sense, Sarah?
Yeah. And
you going to say?
I even clocked it intellectually.
Yep.
And I had a little dilemma.
Yeah.
And then I also had the feeling, Jesus and Mary will take care of it as well.
Yeah. Many of you felt that way. And we will, but only because we love. Yep. We like Mary and I, when we're walking just by ourselves, we usually clip along, like, not at a jog, but, you know, as fast as you can walk, pretty much.
Yeah.
And
But then when we come across something quite beautiful in the natural
We'll
environment,
stop.
we slow down or we stop.
we look at it, we feel about it,
feel it, you know, and so
we notice everything around us as well.
that was very obvious. The more people were in their addictions, the less they were even noticing what was around them.
Yeah. And like I said, you could have just gone walking in an open field or something and got the same effect. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Down to
Ellis. So, like a bad pass the parcel, isn't it?
I noticed that I withdrew. So what happened is I was in my addiction, and then I went up a ramp, and I couldn't breathe and talk at the same time.
Yeah.
So then I stopped talking.
Yeah.
And then people tried to talk, and I said I can't talk anymore because.
Yeah.
And then I walked slowly, and then I was in the front of the group, and then I noticed we lost.
Yeah.
And then I went to Tim, and I said, weren't we supposed to stop at an intersection? I think it's called.
Every intersection.
And then Tim pointed out the intersection on the map, and I thought, oh my God, we're going completely wrong because you said, well, this is here, and I think why didn't we stop there? And then I thought, oh, it's going all wrong.
Yeah.
And
then
I got worried.
Yeah.
Because I noticed, because we waited for the group, and two of us, you stayed just there, and two of us went back up the hill to see if we could find somebody.
Yeah.
And then I was calling out, we found a lot of stuff. And then we went back, and I expressed my concern with Tim that not everybody has the same pace.
Yeah.
And maybe we should take a different route. And then, well, you said, yeah, it's my bad, and you know, you owned up to something, but I felt very worried and responsible. And then there was an intersection, and I know. Then and then I just left the group. But
can we not do the story?
No, I'm sorry. So I left.
What's the point?
Well, I left the group.
You were like, it's too hard. I'm too worried. I'm just going.
Yeah, I just withdrew.
Yeah.
I left the group.
Yeah.
And these are all common behaviours that an average person has when they feel everything gets too hard, you know, to sort out or something like that. So they just withdraw, you know, like step away. And these are all behaviours that we engage in our day-to-day life that frequently we don't see, you know, that we don't see ourselves doing. But they're all ways in which we choose to not love, you know.
But what would have been then the loving thing?
Well, you could have decided you weren't responsible for a start. The responsibility in the case of this group was Tim at the front and us at the back. Everyone else wasn't responsible they're only responsible for their own actions. They're not responsible for the group. Because we organised it, we're responsible for the group. So when we're here, for example, we're responsible for the group. So if we notice one of you treating somebody else badly in this kind of environment, we will say something about it, for sure, every single time. Anytime even we get treated badly, there's been times when we've even walked away from a group because we got treated badly. Right? They've all come there to see us talk. We get treated badly, and by an entire group, we will walk away. Right? We're going to look after if it's a venue we've hired, we'll kick everybody out and walk away.
But I think there's still opportunity for you to love within that. Obviously, we're the responsible three here, but it's like I'm saying.
Yeah, my point wasn't that there wasn't. My point is you're not responsible for what was happening, so why do you feel responsible?
Yes, yeah.
That in itself is taking on a responsibility you weren't given. Does that make sense? But I must point out, when we love, we have a habit of saying, these things are going wrong. Can I do personally something about it? But you wouldn't worry about it. Yeah. Would you?
That was the problem.
Yeah.
I got worried.
So the fear got so much then that you thought, I'm out, rather than sort of problem solve. You could see a problem.
Yeah.
I see something unloving's happening. We need to sort it out. we need to make a plan. Because obviously Jay and I weren't there at that stage because we were so far behind. We couldn't sort that out. But a number of you tried, like Yora and Shord, and
in your sort of injured ways.
Yes,
you tried.
Yeah, tried to just go. How can I'll run? I'll go back. I'll try
because
to
I didn't
up.
agree with the plan because the plan was to do another loop, and I thought, well, there are people in the group who can't do the pace. Yeah. Let's go back, and they didn't agree with. I suggested that, and I was just yeah.
Yeah, but can you see too when people don't agree? That's okay, isn't it? They're allowed to not agree.
Yeah.
Obviously, for us with Tim, it's a bit different because we arranged for him to do certain things. But for everybody else in the group, you're all going to have times when you don't agree, particularly when you have different versions of love in play, right? And when I say different versions of love, that's not the right way of saying it, really. Different versions of evil in play is really the right way of saying it. Because if we all loved in the circumstance, everything would have went very smoothly. Yeah, makes sense? But we expect these things not to go smoothly to a degree.
But I guess for you, Alice, it's data, isn't it? When there's the potential of conflict, when I think something's right or wrong, what's my tendency? Just bow out.
Yeah, and also there's a bit of anger in what you're saying as well. You know, you can't, could you feel your anger? And is anger loving? So when you felt annoyed with the people who were sort of going ahead too fast, which some of you felt, is that anger unloving?
Yeah.
Or is it loving?
Yeah, no, it's unloving.
It's unloving. So anger always indicates a demand, which is unloving. So what was the demand? So the key is to look at yourself and go, okay, what is my demand here? If I'm upset about this. So I wasn't upset with Tim. I wasn't upset with anyone who went ahead. I wasn't upset with the two Margarets, as they know, right? We had a good conversation about modesty and other things like that, but I wasn't upset with them, you know. And in fact, I didn't take full responsibility for them, so I said, I think you need to go this way. It's going to be too hard the other way, and they did for a while, and we looped around and caught up with them on the opposite end of it, with Shord's help, you know. We managed to catch up and find them. But, you know, we made that decision, Mary and I, because they were all loving decisions, but we don't feel upset with you about it.
Yeah.
So even this conversation I'm having with you, some of you feel, getting told off now, you know, but that's not how we feel. We're just trying to use it as an example of just a simple thing like going for a walk.
In a way, guys, I'm not laughing at you, but it is kind of comical.
It's kind of funny.
Yes.
Right?
And I did think, I asked him to lead the trail, but I probably could have thought a little more about what I know about Tim's injury, and perhaps, but in a way, it gives Tim a great example of where
learning as well.
Yeah. So we just.
And this is one reason why we do these kind of practical things, is because in God's way, we're doing this every single day. So when we run things in Australia where we're involved in God's way, and that's on the whole, it's 4 to 5 days every week. The group of people who are there, this is what they're getting every day. Every day. And those of you who've been, who's been? A number? Yeah. Did you find that? It was every day, yeah. And it's pretty confronting because you sort of, another day.
They're still at me about that one thing.
Yeah. There I go again, the same thing, And sometimes you get to the stage where you go, I'm afraid to go the next day. What's going to happen the next day? But this is all how, in practical example, this is all how you can quickly learn where you're at. That makes sense? And I think all of you who have come have benefited from that experience, yes? In one way or another, yes. You've all realised, wow, I didn't realise that, and I didn't realise this, and you have a tendency then to realise it quickly, even though you may not agree, because frequently people don't agree until much later. A lot of times when they're there, they feel very confronted all day, every day, and frequently it's not all day, every day, because you get sent home. as well. When it comes too untenable to manage, the managers of God's way have been told to send you home. So sometimes you get sent home, and then you go along, and many people who get sent home don't want to come the next day because they're worried about getting sent home again. And then they're worried about, embarrassment of getting sent home every day, that kind of thing as well. But it is a great way of learning what love would do, and then at least becoming aware of what you do versus what love would do. Yeah. Of course, when we receive God's love, we don't need that. But obviously, to help a person become sincere about receiving God's love, at some point, remember we said on Friday, at some point they need to be able to measure the pain of what they're doing that's out of harmony with love. So hopefully the walk today has helped you measure some pain about what you're doing out of harmony with love. Does that make sense? So you can see the different ways in which you are becoming unloving, but you don't realise it. Yeah. And then, of course, you can pray to God about that, you see. And then that gives you the opportunity to work through enough to receive God's love about those matters and therefore change in the way in which you behave. Yeah. Make sense? Anna?
I just wonder if you could speak a bit more on those of us who have the injuries of feeling responsible when it's not our need to, because I wasn't even on the walk. And then as soon as I hear from Mary that happened with Tim, I felt responsible for everyone because I hadn't told you that I also knew that Tim had those tendencies.
Yeah, well, we
which
knew
is
that
ridiculous.
already.
I know, exactly.
Let's
condescending
examine
as
Tim's
well.
life.
Yeah.
It's very evident. Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if that's feelings that you guys have had to work through given your soul condition and your role. And I just can't imagine with that injury knowing that you can help so many people. Like I'm still so in that injury, it just even freaks me out thinking about it.
Yeah, one thing to learn is that a part of modesty, one reason why I was talking about it with the two Margarets is part of modesty is understanding your own limitations. Being a person, not God, means automatically you have some limitations. And compared to God, an infinite number of limitations. And this is why I think it's quite funny that people think, Jesus, he should have less limitations. Because fundamentally, I'm still human. I'm not a God, right? So therefore, I have limitations, right? The key is to become aware of your own limitations. Now, obviously, as you grow in love, your limitations become less. That is true. You become less limited. So you'll find as you grow in love, you'll learn faster, you'll be able to make decisions quicker, you'll be able to determine what's loving instantly rather than, having to think about it. You'll be able to, your soul works faster than your mind as well. So there are decisions you'll make that you'll be able to make which would have taken you months to make before, which will take you minutes or seconds to make now. So you find a lot of changes happen as a result of that, but you're still a human. You're a human with a part of the divine in you, right? God's love in you. So you've got to be aware at any point that you're human. So for me, let's say, one of God's the responsibilities that I've been given by God is to care for this earth. That means caring for the earth itself and everybody on it, right? That's one of our responsibilities. That's a part of becoming a teacher, is to learn how to care, right? But I understand that I'm limited in that regard in terms of how I can physically do that. Because while I'm here on earth, I've got more limitations than I've ever had, in the spirit world, far more limitations. I'm in a physical location for a start. That automatically places a limit on what I can do. I need to eat and I need to sleep and I need to care for myself. That places additional limits on what I need to do. So very important to understand that each of us do have limits, and the issue you can face when you feel that you're given a responsibility is that you then work yourself to death trying to do that responsibility. well, obviously that would be unloving to yourself. And also, to some degree, indicates a lack of trust that God's got all of his children in hand. So the way I sort of see it is God's got all of you in hand. While I'm with you, I'm going to spend some of my time with you to try to help you understand how God loves you and understand how to connect to God so you can experience that love. But I'm not responsible for your life in any way. I'm not responsible for what you do with what I teach. I'm not responsible for any of the actions you take. I'm not responsible for making you a more loving person. And I'm not even responsible to listen to you. I don't even have to listen to you, actually.
Yeah. But I think that
have you always felt that chill about it, or did you have to go through a freak out?
In this life, I've had to go through some stuff about it, yeah.
I can talk to that a little bit.
Yeah.
But your relationship with God, just before I do that, your relationship with God helps you understand what true responsibility is about. You know, because a lot of us feel responsibility as duty, something we're guilt-ridden about if we don't fulfill it, whereas true responsibility from God, as God kind of delegates responsibility, is about a privilege and an ability to give a gift, pay it forward, if you like. So that's God's sense of responsibility. But what I've noticed in myself, because I certainly have injuries around responsibility, and I know you have as well, is that it's usually coming from some childhood experience, some past experience, where you've been made to feel responsible for, and it's very interesting for you to examine what exactly you've been made to feel responsible for. Because a lot of men, for example, in the past were made to feel responsible for the provision of wealth and assets, for example, and not much else. They don't feel responsible for much else. And a lot of them try to fulfill that role in a way that is damaging to themselves or others because they believe that without it, they're worthless. Whereas for myself or for a lot of women, there's a lot of feeling about responsibility for people's emotional well-being. And there's a lot of feelings of guilt or shame or that you're sinning if people around you don't feel well or good.
Or
and
if you haven't nursed them.
If you don't nurse them out of their pain and suffering without giving any consideration to the cause of that pain and suffering, and if that person has caused it themselves, a lot of women feel, oh, if they feel it, I must have caused it. Or at the very least, I must be responsible for taking it away. Otherwise, I'm a failure as a woman.
And particularly with your children, right?
Yeah. And my experience of that is I'm still working through injuries around responsibility, is that you need to let yourself cry when you feel, don't act in the injury and cry about how you feel when you don't. And that's the only way you gain more information about where it's come from. And the only way you can release it, as long as you involve God in that process, you'll start to have God's opinion about what is your responsibility and how to love others. Because a lot of times when we feel like responsible for people in, whether it's responsible for their physical well-being or their emotional well-being or lots of other things people have been taught they're responsible for, we often think, well, that's what it means to love them when I take responsibility for that. And that's actually almost 99% of the time what we've been taught is wrong. It's not true. And even Jesus and I having a certain responsibility in returning, it doesn't, God didn't put that on us like, well, if you fail,
Pressure.
You're out. You know, there's no deep punishment. It's more seeing that the desire is there, that we want to do that. Okay, and when we reach a certain condition, we can hand that responsibility. So that's very different to what most of us perceive responsibility to be internally at the moment in our sin-based definitions of it.
Yeah, and when you don't just have a cry and you act in the panic or the obligation or the guilt, it's hard for me to imagine what that would feel like to receive, but it must be a bit, I don't know. I guess some people like it when you take the responsibility away.
They do, yeah. Some do, some don't. It
There's
just depends on their own history, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
But
Feels
Jesus
quite
and I, you'll notice
condescending.
when people try and do that with us, we feel very adverse to it.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't feel loving, actually.
No.
No.
It feels quite self-involved and pressuring Yeah.
So an example of that is many of you offer to help us when we're at these events. Well, how can you help me? You don't know what to do. You don't know the tech. You don't know the setup we want. You don't know, and many of you have no interest to actually know. The real thing you feel is that you just want to feel like you're a help, which is really an addiction. You're not a help. When you're talking to us while we're trying to set up, you're definitely not a help. You know, we're trying to get a job done, and the best way to do it, there's a good scripture in the Bible that says, you know, don't muzzle the bull while it's threshing. Do you know what that means? It means while the bull's doing something, don't put a muzzle on the thing. You know, let it have its way. Get it to do the job it's doing. And, you know, frequently many of you try to put a muzzle on us one way or the other while we're doing something. You know, and you do that frequently for your own selfish purposes. Right? It's not actually to help. If you really wanted to help, you'd find out all the tech we use, how we use it, how, you know, you'd understand it, you would work it out, you would work out how, you know, we set up a room, why we set up the room that way. You'd work all these things out or want to be taught, and then once you're taught all those things, then you can be a help.
But most of you don't even observe what's happening. So, and when you naturally feel drawn to assist, you're often observing what needs to happen, aren't you? Oh, I can see the floor needs mopping. Oh, I can see the... Yeah. But a lot of you don't even have that attitude of even observing what we do when we set up.
Yeah.
And very few of you contact us ahead of time and say, "Oh, I'd like to learn how to help. I'd like to know what's involved so I can do more."
Yeah.
It's
so
usually at the moment, what can I do?
Yeah. And usually when it's like, and you'll have seen me on Friday or Thursday, you'll have seen me saying nothing. I said that to a number of people. Nothing. You can't help me. Right. And it wasn't to offend them. It was more just a statement of fact. You can't help me when you haven't learned. How can you help somebody? It's like saying to a bricklayer, "Can I help you lay some bricks?" And you have never learned how to do it. He's going to have to slow down and teach you, isn't he? So if he's actually building a house, is it in his interest to slow down to help you when you're saying you want to help him? It doesn't make much logical sense, does it?
Is it?
What's really helpful for you to get some education. And you may say to him, "I'd like to pay you for a day to show me how to lay bricks." And then you can pay him for a day and he shows you how to lay bricks. And now tomorrow, can I help you? Now it would mean something, wouldn't it? Can you see that? But again, if you feel God's love, you'd feel all these things. You'd already know all those things. Yeah, this is sort of how love looks in practice. Makes sense? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Tim?
So I was a bit overwhelmed, 40 people, trying to lead 40 people.
It is.
It's a lot.
It's hard.
And when I get overwhelmed, I have a tendency disconnect my heart and even disconnect my head and then just push through.
Yes.
That's that's kind of where we're at. Like, we're just going. Eventually we realised there was a gap and then we stopped.
Yeah. So yes, you're dead right, mate. It's a lot different having a responsibility for people than it is just being responsible for yourself. It's a big difference.
You've got some lessons about that coming up?
Yeah, you got a few coming up with a baby on the way, right? That's a big change in a person's life, because up until that point, generally you're just responsible for yourself, right? And while I say that, the reality is, when I had 2 children, I found it a breeze. It was so easy because I was already in the mode of feeling people and feeling what they need and all these kind of things. So having a couple of kids, I was 21 when I had my first and 23 when I had my second in this life. And it was just a breeze for me, because I was already used to caring for others and noticing what they need and already taking responsibility. But the average person, and particularly the average male on earth, particularly nowadays, hasn't had to do that until they're in the situation where you're now in.
Well, for a lot of people, it's when they have kids is the first time they think, I need to care for someone other than me.
Yeah. And what we do find is a lot of people who attend Divine Truth seminars are single. So therefore, they've never had these experiences where they've even had to care for one other person other than themselves, right? And so there's a lot to learn about love in that place. And the key is to be aware that there is a lot to learn. You know, the more humble you are, the more you can go, oh yeah, I know, I haven't done this in life and I haven't done that in life. So I haven't had any experience in any of these things yet, you know. And that can be very, very helpful in you being open to being educated by God about what a loving thing would be. That all being said, it's also not loving to yourself to compromise constantly. So when you begin to feel responsible for people, or you feel you take up responsibilities, the average person in that mode starts compromising a lot. Yeah.
I felt I wanted to compromise for everyone at once, and
that's right.
Then I just switch up.
That's right. And the trouble is, everybody has different demands. You know, unloving demands. They have different demands. And the problem is, I'll just wait. The problem is when they have these unloving demands, all of those demands come at the person who's generally considered to be like the leader or whatever. Does that make sense? And in the process of that occurring, you have a tendency then to go, right, hook into the people with the highest demands, do what they demand, or many leaders get angry, you know, just get off my back, that kind of thing. It's very difficult to be a leader while at the same time be loving to everybody. And you really, you know, this is why the leaders in the spirit world are all ones that have more of God's love generally, particularly above the sixth sphere. They've all got more of God's love. Because to be a leader, to be a leader of a city, you know, there's plenty of my friends in the spirit world who are leaders of cities, you know. And to be a leader of a city, you've got to have a large degree of love for you to take on that role. Yeah.
A lot of people that will be
Yeah.
Yeah.
So up to
Victoria, yeah.
Yeah, I went full chatty mode. So I probably chatted to like half the people here. But one good thing was that I saw Maxine, who I haven't seen for. Well, I don't know if I ever saw her, but we interacted a lot on Facebook and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, hi, Maxine. And she was like, oh, you type thing. And I was like, what? And then basically she was like, oh, I remember you. I said, oh, do you remember me? And she was like, yeah, for not good reasons. And I said, what? And I had no idea. And then because she was so honest, she made me...
well, not completely honest. No, were you, Maxine? Because you felt angry, but and so it's not completely honest. Yeah. Not honest with yourself, anyway.
Because she was partly honest. She helped me to realise how unloving I had been to her.
Yeah.
And then, like, I saw Courtney later, and I remembered that I was unloving to her as well.
Can I just stop you, though, for a minute, Victoria? Be very careful of these things, of what you're now saying. Can I say why?
Yeah.
You're now measuring whether you've been unloving by somebody else's measure that you've been unloving. And that's Maxine's measure. Right? What did we say Friday?
Whose measure? I wasn't here on Friday.
Whose measure?
I wasn't here on Friday.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because I was
okay.
I was
Whose
here.
measure? God's measure.
God's measure.
Yeah.
Now, you'll find when you both refer to God's measure, you probably find both of you have been unloving to each other, right? And this is the thing, is that when everybody has a habit of comparing their measure of love with somebody else, some person on earth. Does that make sense? And this is not a very good thing to do, because their measure of love will also probably be very distorted, just like yours is, but just in a different direction. Mm-hmm. And so by making the comparison, and when somebody says you've been very unloving, well, I would first have to go, well, okay, by whose measure? You know? And the thing you become more sensitive of, the more God's love you receive, you can feel each person's measure of what love is. So for many of you, you think I'm loving when I give you my time. But sometimes to be loving to you, I need to not give you my time. Does that make sense? And also, many of you think we should keep giving you time. So an example of that is during the week where we're presenting, we often are spending 6 hours with each of you, like in the course of that time. 6 hours, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but for yourself, if ever you've been in the situation where you're talking in front of 100 people for 6 hours, it can already be quite tiring.
Well, who's done it for 1 hour? It's quite tiring, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a teacher, so I'm exhausted by the end of the day, absolutely exhausted.
Yeah. So if you look at it, and particularly teaching a bunch of very, very resistive people on a subject that they're also very resistive to, is very difficult. Like when you've got a lovely group where everybody's wanting to learn, I can talk to 9 hours straight and come away and still feel like I want to do other things. You know?
Yeah.
But when you're with a group that's really resistive, some of them angry, some of them this, some of them shut down, it gets a lot more difficult, right? Now, even after we've done that, frequently many of you come up to us afterwards and want to have a chat, which is indicative of the love that you think we should display to you, right? Without you considering whether you're loving to us, you know? And that frequently happens to us. Like frequently we have, in some events, we have a long lineup of people afterwards, even while we're trying to pack up and all sorts of things, trying to, talk to us here. I just want to say this to you, and I just need to say that to you, and all of those feelings are all unloving. A whole lot of them are all unloving because they're not in accord with understanding the gift that's already been given. Yeah. So the reality is you don't pay to come to our events. You do donate towards them, some of you, not all of you, but some of you donate towards them. But you don't pay to come. We pay for you to come. That's the reality. We have spent so much time organising these events. We spend all the effort and time and energy we have to organise these events. We have paid for you to come. Many of you don't even see it that way. Many of you see, you donated towards it, so now you've paid to come and you've paid for our time. No, you haven't. We're offering a gift, and you at times become more loving and want to help us to provide that gift, which is great. But it's also not a high percentage of people who want to help us in that regard, which is fine because we're providing the gift. But don't expect us to provide another gift after we've just given you one. Do you understand? Like, it's one thing for us to decide to give you a gift, like we're doing today, quite another for you to demand extra time from us than we've already given. Do you see? So,
I was going to ask, in the first century, were the disciples like having to like push people away from you? And because in the Bible it says you often like slipped out, slipped out, and it's like an escape route, maybe.
Well, no. When a situation became unloving for myself, I would generally leave it if I could. And also.
That sort of tends to imply that question that the disciples weren't some of the resistive or demanding ones.
Yeah.
Often they were the worst.
Given that, are you guys disciples? I don't know.
No, I didn't mean it like that. I don't think I'm a disciple.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to put you down.
Oh, sorry, Mary.
I sort of view you like disciples. You trying to learn what we're trying to teach.
Disciple means taught one.
Yeah. So. But
hopefully you're being taught.
We most definitely are.
So, but obviously the person who's teaching you has their own feelings and their own emotions and their own time and their own energy and their own life even. Like Mary and I, just to give an example, this might be a bit embarrassing for Mary, but
let's see.
Mary and I generally have sex every day of the week, if not more than that. Often twice a day a week, every day of the week. When we come on these trips, we've hardly got the energy to do it. like
interferes with our
it
sex
interferes
life.
with our sex life greatly. That's one of the difficulties we face, is how much interference of there is on our own life in order to provide the gift. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've got the same problem with my wife. We're both teachers and exhausted, and we come home and she's like, "Don't even talk to me," because, you know,
tired,
exhausted, and I'm probably a bit more like.
Yeah.
Oh,
Now the personal story without.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes. Yep. So.
But can we just go back to the very first point, which
I'm
is
making a point.
Measuring, yes.
Which I haven't made yet, but go on.
That's all right. You go. Do you remember your route back to the point?
No, the point's quite clear. Mary and I frequently need to make a decision. Well, what are we going to give to you, and what are we going to forego for ourselves in giving that thing to you? Yeah. Does that make sense? And that is a feeling about, if I love somebody and I love the thing enough, and I have enough desire for you, there are sometimes things I forgo that I really love, including spending time with Mary. I really love spending time with Mary. And, you know, this week, just this 1 week, Thursday I didn't get to spend much time with Mary. Friday I didn't get to spend much time with Mary. Saturday I didn't get to spend much time with Mary. Sunday I didn't get to spend much time with Mary. Monday we were catching up on sleep mostly, or trying to, and didn't catch up on much. Yesterday we did. Yesterday I got to spend some time with Mary, but today I'm not getting to spend some time with Mary.
I'm
much.
here.
She's here, but
we're doing what we love.
We're doing what we love, but I'm not, like, when I'm spending time with Mary, I'm with Mary. Like, not with you. I'm with Mary, you know what I mean? I enjoy her company and her time and her energy, and we enjoy doing things together as a result. But, like, so we got to, love says, well, how are you going to balance all that? How are you going to, you know, balance all of that out? Now, if I felt highly responsible for you, then I would also then probably sacrifice more of my time, right, to my own detriment.
Well, that's what actually happened on
That's what happened
our
last trip.
Through my injuries, we sacrificed a lot more time.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to give everyone what they wanted, rather than to love everyone, including ourselves.
Yeah, and we didn't even get enough sleep as a result, or enough, you know, we were moving from place to place. We had 3-day events for the most part every week, you know, and that's really for us a 5-day event, because you've got a set-up day, a pack-up day. Afterwards, we've got to repack all of our gear, and then we've got to move as well, copy all the data, move. So, for example of that this week, every night after I got back from teaching you, I spent 3 hours on the computer unloading our data, every single night, right? So besides coming early, setting up, doing the teaching, I go home and we're both still working at home for another 3 hours. So we've got to consider all that as a part of an act of love of self. And so we get to the stage where we go, okay, what's my capacity? And this is where modesty comes in, which we were talking about on the trip, on the walk. What's my capacity to do? You know, how far can I go without it now becoming a chore or becoming a difficulty on my part to do it? And also, in the case of us, we've got to consider, well, we want to share some truths with you, but it's not our responsibility to do them. That's yours. You know, it's not our responsibility to be your cult leaders. We're not cult leaders. Get out of your head that we are. Many of you are drawn to us initially thinking we're going to be, even, and thinking we're going to somehow guide your personal life and make all these suggestions to you and what you're going to do with your life and how you're going to live your life. That we have no intention to ever do that, right? Mary and I like living our quiet life. In the spirit world, there's many, many times when we have the only sphere and we have it all to ourselves. And then we decide, I've got some energy, let's go and see our brothers and sisters, you know.
Yeah. Yep. Do you have many spirit bodies at that level?
Yeah.
That you can just go, you can
do,
be doing
but
loads of stuff?
Your soul has a limited amount of energy still. Your soul provides energy to all of those bodies, and your soul has a limited amount of energy still. So the real you has a limited amount of energy. You're not God, and you never will be. You have a limited amount of energy. Your energy does increase dependent upon your condition, but you're still limited, and you've got to understand your limits, you know. And a part of what we're finding ourselves here on earth in this body, because this is not our soul, it's just our body. This body has limits of what it can do, you know. We're going to keep getting older until such a time as we make a certain transition, which is a transition to our soul. And until that occurs, we're going to keep getting older. We'll keep getting having the limitations of old age.
Oh, I thought when you was at one with God, you would stop aging. Is that
Yeah,
not true?
well, our soul is.
Yeah,
but
we will. Yes, but obviously we're not yet back in connection with our soul. Yeah.
So when you,
And we're in a
you're not
different
talking about the
position.
soul union because there's
Victoria, you need to listen more than you talk. Yep. And this is probably one thing that annoyed you with Maxine, right?
I didn't feel annoyed at her. Oh, do you
No,
mean at
that
the
Maxine
time?
got annoyed with you.
Yeah. I was talking to Maxine. Yeah. You don't listen very much. Yeah. Many
I'm
of you
starting
don't
to lose.
actually.
I'm
Many of you
starting
talk
to
a
lose
lot.
my hearing.
So you're doing it again. So yeah, what we try to do. You feel embarrassed now. Yeah, I didn't say all that to shut you up. I'm just saying that you know, many times, many of you ask us a question. We try to give you a complete answer, and you don't even give us the time to do that. Does that make sense? And for many reasons, you do that. Sometimes it's because you want to prove what you know, right? Which is partially your problem, Victoria. But also sometimes it's you're nervous, or you feel that I'm not saying. Many of you have this feeling that I'm not getting your point, but actually, you don't understand at this point that most of the time I'm way beyond your point, right? You know, and not only am I way beyond it, but I'm also at a stage where I know exactly what you need to do to break down the problem. And often you don't know what to do to break down the problem. And quite often what you think you need to do to break down the problem is not what you need to do to break down the problem. And unless you can listen, you won't know all of those things. Yeah. Yep. And I know it's difficult talking to me. Most people find it difficult talking to me under many circumstances. Perhaps you guys would know better why you find it difficult than I do. Well, maybe not, but but many of you find, even now, many of you find me opinionated. Isn't that not true? No? Yes, it's true. And you don't realise I'm here in front of you in a teaching role. Under normal circumstances, if you were just in my company and we were home having a chat, I'm not here in front of you as a teaching role. For me, a teaching role is different than just being my normal self with people. Yeah. Although a large part of who we are is a teacher, but that's why I've been given certain names about being a teacher. Yeah. But learning to listen with regard to truth is a very important aspect of growth. Yep. You don't need to prove to me what you know. There's a very large probability in every case that I already know what you know. Not that I already know what you know, I'm saying that I already know, I can feel from you what you know. Does that make sense? But I don't mean that I know what you know, I mean that I can feel from you exactly what you do know. And you will find the same ability will occur as you do what?
Receive God's love.
Receive God's love. Yeah.
And also your interaction with Maxine will change. The more Maxine and the more you receive God's love.
That's right.
But the very first answer to your very first question was, well, your first comment, you didn't really pose a question. I don't know if you were getting to one, but it was about not taking Maxine's definition of love as God's definition of love, essentially.
Yeah. And this is very important, Victoria. You have a habit of doing one or the other. Like your definition of love is God's or the other person's is God's, but not actually both parties assessing what is God's definition of love in the circumstance.
Yeah. That's when you get to be really friends with people, is when you're both seeking God's definition of love all the time.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah. Until then, it's like everyone you meet's almost like an acquaintance in a way. Many of you are our acquaintances. We know you. We haven't got to know you on a personal level yet for all sorts of reasons. But one of the main ones is we don't agree with regard to what love is yet. Do you understand that? Like, you and I don't agree on what love is. You know? And you'll actually find that you don't agree with God on what love is either, to a large degree. And the key is the more you agree, the more you'll find our company and us find your company seamless. In other words, like just old friends meeting. As soon as you catch up again, it's just like another old friend meeting again, and off you go again and having chats. And you don't think about it so much under those circumstances because you're both in harmony with God with regard to what love would do.
And even before then, even if you're both just seeking it, there's a real capacity for more intimacy in a friendship. I don't mean sexual intimacy. I mean, you know, you're not trying to get your addiction or get agreement from the other party. You're getting to know that person, and that because you're both seeking God's opinion on things, you're getting to know yourself through the interaction as well of where you're sinning, where your personality is. So it's a very nice process.
So while it is good to listen to other people and how they respond to you, because that's a, you know, you can see, oh, well, that person's very uncomfortable with me, or that person doesn't like me very much, or whatever. It's also really important that you're able to hear from God what God feels about your behaviour. Because if somebody doesn't like you, but you're in alignment with God on the issue, then can you see that would be their problem, right? But if somebody doesn't like you, but you're not in alignment with God on the issue, and they are more in alignment than you are, although I would suggest the fact that they don't like you is already a problem, you know, then you might need to reconsider.
We come to Philippa and maybe to Edna.
Definitely.
That's just got me thinking, how do we get to know other people without being in all this addiction? Because I noticed for me, I was walking along and there were some people that I knew, so I was talking about, you know, trying to know a bit more about their life and what's been going on and how they've been the last few days. And then in a period where I felt like, oh, maybe I just want to walk on my own for a bit. But then thinking, oh, well, I don't want to isolate myself and walk on my own and do the quiet thing. So yeah, I was a bit sort of backwards and forwards. And
can you see straight away that's you in your head?
Yes.
A person who's in their soul goes, I'm interested in Philippa, I want to talk to her a bit. Now I've stopped being interested, or I just want to be alone, so now I'll be alone. It's not, they don't think about it, they don't worry about it, they don't go, oh, maybe I'm isolating myself. Does that make sense? They just do it. Yeah, and everything they do will be harmonious with love either way, right? So sometimes you'll notice I come up to you and just make a very brief comment and then walk away, and some of you get shocked about some of the comments, but you know, that's what I feel like doing in the moment. It feels like I need to say that in the moment. When you're connected with God, you're more in that space where you're doing what is felt. But because you're close to God's opinion, what is felt is always going to be loving in the way you do it, right? So you don't sort of go through so much internal intellectual banter where you worry about things very much. And I would suggest every time you're trying to make a decision, should I do this or should I do that, straight away you're worried and you just need to stop. And you just need to ponder, why am I in a place of indecision, right? The person who's in their soul and in a state of love never is undecided. So the fact that I'm undecided is indicative of the fact that there's a scripture, another scripture in the Bible that says you're limping on two different opinions. And it's funny how it says the word limping. like you have a limp, like you're carrying a limp, you know. And the reason why it sort of makes that statement is quite often when we're in two different opinions, we've got unlovingness going on, and that causes to do things or make choices or decisions that are like us limiting our own movement, like a limp. You know, we're causing our own, we slow down ourselves through this indecision. So when you're in a state of indecision, so the one you mentioned is an indecisive place. So when you're in a state of indecision, you know, well, there's probably multiple things that are unloving going on now. Does that make sense, Philippa? One was that you felt the need, there's obviously guilt there as to going off on your own. Well, you're allowed to go off on your own. You're allowed to do that, aren't you? You've got free will. You've got responsibility for your own life. You're allowed to make decision to leave any conversation at any time you wish.
Yeah, you don't owe anyone your interest. It's a gift.
Yeah, even your partner, your children, anybody. God's given you the gift of free will. You're allowed to use it how you desire to use it. And of course you would consider other people in the usage of it under all circumstances. You would just consider whether it's loving. But it is loving for you to just go leave people to their own stuff and you do your own stuff. That's loving too. It's not loving to observe them in pain and suffering and not want to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely the guilt resonates of having to give people attention or listen or that kind of injury.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I was aware of in myself is because I have a tendency to isolate and then not want to connect with somebody.
Well, that's also driven by a sin too, though, the tendency to isolate. See, when you have a habit of giving to people, you get to a point where there's a threshold of your own pain where you go, now I just want time by myself. Does that make sense? And so both states are actually driven by a sin of one kind or another. You're sort of swinging towards the state of giving, and now swinging towards the state of, oh, I'm tired now, I need to stop giving. But it's not a feeling of like just love of self that drives it. It's more a feeling of tired with the person driving it. Do you know what I mean?
And then you often, this is a big one of mine, you know, then when you're by yourself, you often find it hard to reconnect with yourself because all you just want is a break because you're just so exhausted from like all that engagement with everyone else.
So that's when a person generally like watches telly or eats too much or
or just know. Or you just get in the want a numb zone. Yeah. Obviously when we love, we're able to be with others, stay connected to ourselves and only express interest or engagement with them as much as our loving will wants to do that, rather than our guilt or our feeling of responsibility for them or our worry about being unloving in some way often causes us to engage with people when our free will desire is not actually to do that. And sometimes when we have to have feelings of our own or we just want to be with ourselves, we can, like Jesus and I on our walk, or even with you guys, you can just be with yourself while you're with others and not be unloving about that. But
if someone's at you constantly and you just want to be with yourself, but us saying, you just need to tell them, shut up.
I don't want to talk to you.
Just say, I need some quiet time, thanks.
Thank you.
Frequently we walk away rather than do that because we don't want to offend them but that's another injury. Like, honesty would just say, I need some quiet time. I'm going to take it. Yeah. Makes sense. Now, the reason why all of this is a question is because we still don't know what God's love would do. Yeah. Fundamentally, the more in alignment with God's love you become, it no longer becomes a question. You just naturally do.
And we don't really know how to love ourselves either.
That's right. Well, a part of receiving God's love is learning how to love yourself, isn't it? God's trying to show you the importance of love of self as well as love of others. From God's perspective, you're equal. So you and I are equal. So that means if I'm giving you more than I would give myself, I'm already out of harmony with that love. But if I'm also wanting from you more than I would do for myself, I'm out of harmony with that love. You see, so you feel the nuances of that, the more in alignment with God's love you are. Yeah. There was some. Ednelli.
Yeah. It is not a question about the walk. Is it okay?
It's okay.
Okay. It's about God's principles.
Yes.
Love is a substance from God.
It is.
And are all the other principles also substances that we can feel, or?
Yes, you could say a part of God's soul. So if we look at it from a theoretical perspective, which is what I'm going to share with you, if you think of God's soul as a container of thoughts, emotions, feelings, passions, senses. Now, God's container is infinite. So it's a big container, you could say, storing all of these feelings and thoughts and emotions. And God's soul is, like you could say, you could use the word pregnant with desires, And the reason why I use the word pregnant, because any time God exercises a desire, it instantly gives birth to the thing that God desires, right? So God's soul is a container of all of these feelings and emotions. They're all substances. And they all flow from God in such a way that you can see the substances if you use your soul perceptions. You can actually see the flow of these substances from God. And many of our spirit friends, of course, can see when you're receiving divine love because of that, because they can see the connection with the Holy Spirit that occurs, the Spirit being God's energy, which is specifically for the delivery of his love. So what the Holy Spirit is God's it's an energy that comes from God, and we called it, in the first century, I coined the term spirit that comes from God. It's part of God's energy, which is part of God's spirit. And that spirit is holy because it's the thing that brings you the most holy part of God, which is love. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that there's any unholy part of God, because there isn't, but it's just the thing that's the most important, in particular, to receive first. But it is a substance. It does have an effect on your soul. In fact, as the substance enters your soul, it actually starts transforming it. It's like adding cordial to water, you could say, or something like that. Where you got water and it's just clear, and then you add something to it, and now that water has things in it, right? And it's changing the function of the water, its capability, its composition, and its constituent chemical reactions and everything are all changing, right? And it's the same with your soul. There's a whole heap of reactions that start beginning when you receive God's love that start changing your soul into a different creature. So you're no longer human. The way when you first receive God's love, from then on, you're no longer human only, because you've got a part of God in you after that. So you're no longer just a human anymore. Now, every one of God's substances has that effect. But of course, not all of them can be felt unless the love comes first. Because the love has to do work on your soul before you can understand other things that you can seek for from God. And this is the transition between the seventh and eighth sphere, is really getting to the stage where you're at one with God with love. So now you can always receive more love, but now you're capable of also starting to receive other substances of God, because you're at one with God, and so therefore can be educated about what those other substances are, right? Before then, you can't know, right? Because your soul hasn't changed enough to know. In the eighth sphere, you don't understand things so much with your mind anymore. Your mind is just a tool. So at the moment, most of you are listening to divine truth and you're trying to understand it with your mind. And that's because, intellectually on earth, we're by the time we're usually a few years of age, 2 or 3 years of age, we've been educated that the way you educate yourself is via your mind. Now, God doesn't agree with that. That's just that's just a human idea of education. God's view of education is that your soul gets educated, your feelings and your emotions get educated. And for you to get enough education in your soul to begin to receive other substances from God, you need to firstly have received God's love, and that love needs to transform your soul into a new creature enough that other substances from God can be received. Before then, they can't be. Does that make sense, Anneli? Before you've received love to the point of becoming at one with God, you really cannot receive any other things from God, any other substances from God. Because all of them are dependent upon the condition of love to be received. Do you grasp what my meaning?
Kind of, because what I was kind of understanding is that if these principles are part of God's character and personality,
yep.
And for me it's awesome that we even have words for them, like function, economy, and governance. And
yep.
Like, wow, these are God's.
Yeah.
And if we could love them, can we love more God?
Yeah, obviously the more of God's love we receive, the more capability we have to understand what we're loving, if you follow my meaning. So, for example, when we talk about, say, governance, which is an aspect or a quality of God, and also an aspect or quality of God's love, to understand it completely, you need to receive enough of God's love to understand how to wield it, how to govern things. So, in the spirit world, our soul, Mary and my soul, governs everything below the 36th sphere. But the way you think of governance is not the way we govern, right? And it's also not the way God governs. Like when you think of governance on earth, what do you think of? So when a government governs on earth, what do they do? So they dictate, they control. They have two forms of enforcement. Two forms. One's an enforcement for internal for the government, and that enforcement is the policing system, right? And then they have an external form of enforcement, which is the military. So that's how to force themselves upon other nations. They enforce themselves via the military. So that's the enforcers of their government, you could say, right? Now, it's interesting when you compare that with all God's method of governing, because it's very, very different than that. You know, there are enforcing, like there's laws that enforce certain rules, but all of those laws are not like constantly punishing in the way that the forms of government that we use on earth are. So when we use the term governance, from God's perspective, it's more like suggestion. But even that doesn't accurately describe it, because it's not really a suggestion, because the law is upheld.
Open to negotiation.
It's not open to negotiation, but it is a suggestion in the sense that your free will is still able to be observed, and you're allowed to break that rule if you so desire. Of course, not without consequence, but you are able to break it. You think in governance on earth, if you try to break a law and you're picked up for it, you'll be put in jail. You'll actually be stopped from breaking the law. Does that make sense to you? Like the whole point of a prison is to stop you breaking the law, isn't it? One way or the other, to restrict your ability to govern, right, or to govern your own life. You are placed in a prison and your will is controlled. Well, God doesn't do that to you. The laws have a penalty upon your soul so that you can feel what happened rather than have the restriction like physically. So the beautiful thing about that is that if you're sensitive, you can respond, and if you're not sensitive, you won't, and you'll continue on your merry way sinning some more, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? The more of God's love you receive, the more you feel there is governance upon your soul. It's not just an idea anymore, you feel it.
No.
A lot of us on earth in our state of sin, we sort of feel, oh, well, that's an interesting idea, but I can still do whatever I want. I'm still basically God. But the more of God's love you receive, and even if you intellectually see, oh, yes, there seems to be laws, there seems to be pain and suffering, it's a very external idea. But God's governance is really upon our soul, as you're saying, and the more of God's love you receive, the more you understand that.
Yeah, let's look at an addiction, for an example. An addiction is an evil love, right? So let's look at an addiction. The average person on earth views their addictions very innocently, they think. They sort of almost view their addictions as, you've got to do them. You know,
Well, it's how I enjoy life.
It's not just that. You've got to do them. You feel impelled to. Like, you know, the average one of you today, when you were walking next to your neighbour, you felt like you had to talk. You don't have to. You're allowed to be silent. You felt like you had to talk. There's many of you I walked with the whole time and you were talking to me and I never opened my mouth once. Right? You didn't even contemplate whether I was even listening. I was, but for many of you, you wouldn't have known because you spent too much time talking rather than feeling me to know. You know what I mean? I was listening, but I could have not been. And you wouldn't have even known. So, you know, the average person sort of goes, I'm in my addiction, I've got to do it, I've got to do it. The feeling inside of the soul is, I am doing it. I am doing it. I am doing it. I'm doing it right now. I'm doing it. Now, they're evil loves. All of those are evil loves, but the average person does not feel they are. If we were in alignment with God, we would know they are. We would understand that our addictions are evil loves, that they actually generate almost all of the sin in our lives. Our addiction is what does that. You know, almost every sin we ever commit is driven by an addiction of some kind that we feel is good. Right? Now, when you're in alignment with God on the matter, you would feel that would not be good. You would know that. But when you've received some of God's substance in your soul, not only do you know it, but it's impossible to do it. Because to do it would be to act against the substance that's present, right? So it's very different than what most people imagine. Most people sort of imagine that they receive some of God's love and then they learn how to do the right thing from that. But it's not really like that. You receive some of God's love and it really hurts to act against it after that.
Because you still can, but it's like when you're in a state of sin is the thing pulling you into action. When you've received some of God's love, now there's a different pull upon you. You can always go against those pulls.
But it's hard.
But it's hard.
Harder.
In both directions.
Yeah. But you won't be in a place of indecision because the substance is saying, this is the way. Mm-hmm. Right? That's why in the first century, you know, God's truth was called the way. Yeah. That's why we called the organisation that we founded in Australia God's Way, right? Not God's love, but God's way, because it's a way of life that you start doing, you know, you start engaging. Makes sense? But yes, you're right, Neely, there are substances you can receive, but they're all dependent upon receiving the first one. And the reason why is because your soul cannot grow beyond its current capacity of being human without receiving the first one, and therefore it cannot receive any other substances that are divine unless the first substance that is divine, love, is firstly received. Make sense? Yeah.
But I like your feeling to love the principles, because you can pray to God about the principles. God, show me this principle, you know, through your love, show me this principle. And
the nuances of it as well. Yeah.
That's a lovely exercise, actually.
Yeah.
To the extent that I can feel it and understand it.
Yeah, but understand you're not going to understand them, until you receive some of God's love, because God's love changes your soul enough to understand them properly.
You can't really long to God. God, show me function, but don't give me any love.
And you also can't understand truth until you understand, like, receive the love either, to a large degree. Like, truth is interesting because there's a certain amount of truth you can absorb intellectually. The human has been able to absorb enough truth to reach the sixth sphere of the spirit world. So therefore, you're able to do all of that intellectually, and through your exercise of your own effort without having any substance from God. But you can't enter the seventh without love from God. And you can't even understand the seventh without love from God, actually. You can't even live there on any level without feeling a degree of pain unless you have the substance of God. Nobody can even be taken there unless they have the substance of God in them. So there is a certain, you got to remember, we talked about this on Friday. We said there's a limit of the perfect natural man. Remember we talked about that Friday? Your love, just as a person, as a human, is limited. It's always going to be limited. It's the limit of your design as a human, right? For you to go beyond that limit, you need something outside of yourself, and that's God's love. And one reason why you need it is because without the substance outside of yourself, your soul is not going to be transformed enough to enter the next part of your development. Your soul needs the substance in order to be able to understand anything beyond the sixth sphere. Anything beyond it, actually. Yeah. Without receiving God's love, no matter how I could talk to you about everything that happens in the seventh and everything that in the eighth, none of you will grasp any of it unless you receive God's love to that point. And this is why in the spirit world, frequently we don't share things I've shared with you on earth. Frequently I wouldn't be sharing with people in the spirit world. You only share with them what they're right at this moment capable in their soul of receiving, is all that you share.
Thank you.
So at the moment, many of you have had shared with you through divine truth more than what you're capable in your soul of receiving, and then you make the big mistake of trying to do it. You understand? Without there being a heart, the heart-based, the love-based understanding of it. And this is where we make mistakes frequently, because you've been taught from a young age in this life that the way you learn is through your head, through your intellect. That's the way you prove yourself to your parents, through your intellect. You've been taught that. And so, when somebody starts teaching you divine truth, you try to apply the same learning principles to that as what you did when you went to school and learnt maths or science or English or something. And none of it's going to work, but initially you sort of think and hope that it will. Yeah. After a while you give that up, and then things improve more rapidly after that, generally. Yeah.
Honestly, it's a good thing to give it up. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay.
We've got...
If we go to Courtney, maybe.
So with wanting to receive, or the idea of receiving God's feelings about all of our evil loves and having all of them illuminated, if you feel very worried about that, is that a fear to process, or how do you deal with the worry?
I can answer your question, or I can answer your true feelings.
Okay.
Which one do you want?
True feelings.
Your true feelings are that you're angry about it.
Sure.
Not worried about it.
Okay.
So the very first thing you need to bear in mind is, if you're angry about something, then you're highly likely never going to do it. While you're angry.
Yeah.
So the very first thing to do is work out why you're so angry. So when it comes to yourself, Courtney, you're really angry about having to feel sadness. You're really angry about, like, what you call impossible feelings. Do you follow? Yep.
Okay.
And you've gotten yourself so angry about it that you now teach you're sort of almost, And you don't want to own up that you're angry. You want to say you're worried.
I want it to be sound nicer.
Yeah, you want it to sound nicer. But, you know, God's not hung up about the words like you are. He's going, no, Courtney, you're just angry. You just don't want to do it, and just in resistance, right? So it's really important to face up to truths like that. Like, am I angry or am I afraid? Now, let's compare a person who's afraid versus a person who's angry. A person who's afraid is generally timid, reserved, stands back from things, doesn't, you know, they normally are afraid to make movement, and they're afraid to show themselves, they're afraid. You're none of those things.
Really?
Yeah, you're outspoken, you have your say when you want it, you get pretty forceful when you want to be. So that's indicative of the fact that you're not that afraid, really. Not as afraid as you think.
Right.
You're angry, right? And you can easily tell a person who's angry generally, and the more of God's love you receive, of course, it makes it a lot easier. But even just generally in their outward demeanour and what they do, you can often tell that they're angry because they have the same sort of feeling. They're not going to stand back. They're going to say what they want to say. So frequently we see people saying to us things like, I'm really afraid. And I go, I don't feel you're that afraid at all. I feel you're very angry. You know. Now, let's look at anger. What's its purpose?
Power.
Over?
Control.
Over?
Over fear and or grief.
Yeah, over yourself, isn't it? Over your own feelings, fundamentally. Frequently it's exercised by trying to take power over others, but frequently it's just power over your own feelings, isn't it? Right? So why do you want so much power over your own feelings? Well, partially it's because you don't understand the power of your feelings. Do you understand what I mean by that? Feelings are powerful, right? And they all could do things to change your life. All of your feelings, if you followed them, they would change your life, right? Most people don't want that. Most people want control over their feelings because they want a semblance of what they believe is control over their life, right? So feelings are like, you could say feelings are one of the primary fundamental things that are about your soul, your soul's core function.
It's
is to do
composition almost.
Yeah, is to do with feelings. In fact, emotions and feelings are the brain of your soul. They're the intellectual part of your soul. Right? So you know how we call the intellect intelligence or something like that? You could call it your soul intelligence. Right? Feelings and emotions are your soul intelligence. They tell you a lot about where you're really at. Right? So when you don't want to have them, you are severely it's like putting a cast around your soul, when you got a broken arm and you put a cast around it. What is the purpose of the cast?
Hold it in place.
It's to hold it in place, to not have it change or grow,
to
move because they're worried about the bone, not mending, of course. So you put a cast, so don't move it, and now everything should go back together is the general thinking, right? But if you put your soul in a cast, what's the purpose of that? Can you see it's to control all of your soul's functions? And particularly if you think your soul is primarily your feelings and your emotions, your desires and your passions, you're controlling your soul's personality, controls emotions, feelings, passions, desires, the longings of your soul, by being angry with it, by controlling it with anger, right? What does that do? It automatically means that the functionality of your soul is severely inhibited. So what I notice for yourself, Courtney, is you're asking me how to grow while at the same time severely curtailing your own growth.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you? Now, you think about that logically. I'm thinking I want to grow. I'm hoping I want to grow.
I think a good girl grows.
A good girl should grow. I've heard this divine truth now. I should do it type of feeling. I need to be a good girl and do it type of thing. But internally there's this, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it.
What's it going to mean? What's going to happen next?
There's going to be desires have to change. There's going to be emotions that I'm going to have to feel. A lot of them are not going to be good, is what you believe. Actually, emotions are great, whether they're sad or not. They are great because you start recognizing the power of the soul. But this is not the way you think. You sort of think bad emotion, not no bad emotion, good emotion, because it's going to help me grow. You think bad emotion always. Keep it under wraps. And also you have a strong feeling, Courtney, that you're not capable of feeling your feelings, your emotions. This is something that many people have, where they are frightened of their own emotions so much that they feel they're never going to be able to, never let them go, never let them be there, never let yourself be conscious of them, because they could like damage your entire life.
And you might be stuck in them forever, or they might just govern you rather than you let them go.
And also just this underlying feeling, I just can't handle them. I just can't handle particularly things like grief, right? I just can't handle it. Many people on earth have the feeling they'd rather kill themselves than handle their grief. Yeah. And many do. Kill themselves, not just physically kill themselves, but also kill them through sort of diseases that are all about managing grief. Yeah. And so you've got to face, I'm just angry about all that, right? And unless you really connect to that, it's going to be hard to share truth with you about things. You follow?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I notice is almost in every question, you always say you're worried or you're afraid, right? And that's indicative of the fact that you've got a lot of judgment about anger.
I do.
Yeah? So obviously, how were you brought up? You think about your upbringing.
Yeah, I mean, religious and pretty abusive.
Yeah, but let's look at the religious.
Well,
what's the religion tell you? What did it tell you about anger, in particular?
That God would hate you forever.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like the worst possible thing that you could ever be or experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially anger with God.
Yeah, that's the worst.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I have a lot of. And that's
well, mostly because you're angry about how he made you. But
just because you think, when we have that feeling when we can't cope, we have the belief, I can't cope with the intensity of my own feelings, then we start to feel, God, you're unloving for creating me.
You shouldn't have made me like this.
To have intense feelings.
Totally.
How dare you make me like this?
This is wrong. This is unloving.
You should have made me more like a robot or whatever, where it's easier. You just program me and I'll do it. That kind of thing.
Why would you make me in some way that I can't survive it?
Yeah, that's
That
your
kind of
feeling,
anger,
but of course not God's.
But yeah, the religious, there's no coming back from being angry if you admit
There's
that you are.
no forgiveness
It's
for
your
it.
personality if you are.
Yep.
I don't know if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. So internally what I'm saying to you, Courtney, is you've got a lot of judgment that you are angry, and so you'd rather reframe it into being like afraid or being worried or concerned or, these kind of statements you often make.
Yep.
You're going to have to learn how to be angry without sinning.
Yeah. Okay.
As I said, I think on Saturday.
Yeah.
Sunday, maybe. Yeah, maybe Sunday. But, you can do that by just feeling your anger. You can put yourself in a situation where you're allowed to have it. Of course, it's not going to dissipate unless you also accept some truths. And those truths need to be accepted emotionally, not just intellectually. So one truth is that your feelings are good. So why would you try to restrict them? Yeah. So that's a feeling that you need to, at some point, get to. If you think your feelings are bad every time you have them, then of course you're going to be very inclined to be angry every time you have one. Makes sense?
Yeah.
But you've got this additional layer on top of the anger which says you're not allowed to be angry either.
Yeah.
And so you're constantly trying to portray yourself as not angry.
Yeah.
Which doesn't help. It's just harmful. It also causes a lot of internal turmoil in your body. So this is where a lot of your internal body problems come from.
Yeah.
Because you're in a place of disagreement internally, your body is going to display these disagreements in different ways. And most of your disagreements are about anger versus fear. And those two things cause lots of body problems of different kinds. And so you're going to end up feeling quite sick in your body as a result.
So like just being in facade with yourself almost?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
It's like you've got the cast on your soul, which is like, I'm going to use anger to keep
suppress.
it all under control. And then you're putting another cast on top saying, I'm not allowed to be angry. So you're trying to restrict and restrict and restrict. And your body is under a lot of stress. Pressure then, you know.
Yeah, it's not, the energy in it's not flowing.
Yeah.
That causes disease.
Yeah.
Because there's so much restriction on both the anger. See, a person who lets themselves be angry, ironically, doesn't get a lot of disease. I'm not suggesting that's what all of you need to do in the sense of the long run.
Don't take it out on other
people.
people.
But, you know, but a person who usually gets disease usually refers everything back to themselves and punishes themselves for how they feel. So you have anger and you punish yourself for your anger rather than just acknowledging that you have it. Yeah. And if you acknowledge you have it, it'll relieve your body a lot, but it'll also help you understand, okay, why do I have so much? Like, what am I angry about? And it's interesting when I ask you what you're angry about, you can often list them, the anger that you have, but it's very rare that you volunteer that information because you don't even want to be conscious of it yourself. Yep.
Yeah, because of the judgment.
So rather than saying to me, you're afraid or you're
I'll
worried,
stop doing that.
Start with the fact you're angry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you were going to ask me a question.
Well,
I stopped you because I wanted to do
yeah,
that.
because I wasn't being honest.
Yeah.
It was just about developing the desire for God, that God's going to illuminate all of the evil loves, the addictions. And I was telling myself I was worried about that, but I'm angry about that. And but either way, I could tell I obviously don't have a desire for it. So
yes. When we don't have a desire for something, it's always usually because we're angry. Yep.
Okay.
You know, so
A desire for something good.
Like today, many of you didn't desire to love your brother or sister. That's because you're angry about it, one way or the other. You know, you got to let yourself feel what you're angry about. Many of you had no reflection about the environment today when we were in it. That's because you're angry with it. Many of you are trying to bring the environment into your control, and you act like that in your day-to-day life without you fitting into the environment and its, abilities. So many of you have that. We're often angry about a lot of things, like our own feelings, how we fit into the world, our comfort levels, and these angers all come from different things in our childhood, expectations, demands that were developed in our childhood. And the younger you are, many of you are more angry than the older ones even sometimes, because you've had demands and addictions met easier. So today we see a lot of 5-year-olds and they're in such extremely bad condition, like 50 years ago a 20-year-old would have been. Because they have no moral development, no principles. They're not taught any principles or morals by their parents at all. And then on top of that, they have huge numbers of demands and addictions that they expect their parents to meet. And their parents do. The parents have taught them that they are going to. And so we see many 5-year-olds now in the same soul condition as what we see a 20-year-old in the 60s. Yep. For these reasons. Yep. Everything's so more accessible. Your addictions are more accessible. There's children going around now, 3 years old, playing video games on their mobile phones.
And bossing their mums around.
By yelling and screaming at them constantly. Yeah. So it's not good, the anger, but you've got to see that, I've got to start where I am. You know what I mean? Like, this is where I am. I'm angry. And learn how to be honest with yourself about what you're angry about.
This is, and it's so important for everyone. You know, this is where everyone needs to start, becoming incredibly honest with yourself. Because most of the time we have a facade that's designed by us to make ourselves feel better about ourselves or feel more comfortable. And really the essence of prayer is your honesty with God. And so unless you can be honest with yourself, how can you be honest with God? It's very important. Yeah.
Remember, the Holy Spirit is attracted to those who are in a spirit of truth with God. So when you're saying to yourself you don't have an emotion when you do, you're no longer in a spirit of truth with God, so nothing else can happen now. So far better to own up to your anger than it is to make out you don't have it.
Yeah.
Or to convert it into fear.
Relabel it. It's like we got out the labeler. Not anger, fear.
Yeah.
Stick that.
How many of you were involved in New Age movement before we met you? Right? You were taught to reframe everything, were you not? If something looked bad, oh, it was good really. You know, that kind of thing. You're taught to reframe everything. That's really bad for your soul.
It's so bad for you. It's like teaching you how to disassociate. Yeah. It's everything that we're trying to undo is on this path.
Yeah. So you just got to bear that in mind. What is the time?
Yeah, I might need a...
Toilet break, shall we? Just
yes.
a 5 minute?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Yeah.